Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Our topic is arguably one of the most important topics in all of health and medicine. That is our immune system. And it's never been more important than the last couple of years. My guest is Dr. Heather Moday, who is an immunologist, a functional medicine doctor, and the author of the book, The Immunotype Breakthrough, Your Personalized Plan to Balance Your Immune System, Optimize health, and build lifelong resistance. Dr. Moday, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
So people have been so interested in building their own immune system because we know that our immune system is our body's way of fighting off all kinds of pathogens, diseases, and in particular, which you really address a lot in your book, COVID-19. How important is our immune system?
Well, it's extremely important. As I talk about in my book, it really affects just about every single organ in the body, every cell. It's a system that's everywhere. It doesn't have a particular place that it lives, and it affects outcomes of every single disease that we have. So when our immune system is not balanced and when it goes awry, it generally almost always causes some symptom or disease.
So a lot of people wonder whether they have a strong immune system. And, for me, it's been very interesting during the COVID-19 pandemic to see some people who got COVID and did very well, and other people who looked kind of healthy. I mean, I would have guessed that they had a really strong immune system. They ended up in the hospital. Can you address, how does a person know whether they have a strong immune system?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's really obvious, right? So many of us may have known diseases or a history of getting sick very frequently or a history of being on immune suppressive medications and things like that. So that might give you a clue. But so many of the chronic diseases that we all suffer from, things like diabetes or heart disease, we don't always see it on the surface. It's often silent until it's not. But those diseases are associated with chronic inflammation and sort of a distracted immune system. And so you're absolutely correct that many people were caught off guard when they then were presented with this novel virus that, we had never seen before. So we don't have a history of having antibodies or a memory of this virus. And so many people, unfortunately, had very bad outcomes and died because we didn't have prior protection, and we may not have known that there was some underlying immune imbalance.
So moving forward, there was, for the longest time, hope that this virus would sort of go away and we would vanquish it and this fight would be over. And now it sort of looks like we're going to have to live alongside of COVID. Moving forward, especially as it relates to COVID, how important is the immune system?
Extremely important for the reasons that you just mentioned. And I think also, in a way, if I could say that one good thing came out of COVID, it's the fact that we now realize that, A, we do need to pay more attention to taking care of ourselves and our immune system. And that also, this opens up opportunity for people to make those changes. Because yes, this is probably going to be an endemic virus, meaning it's going to float around in the population. It's going to come up from time to time, just like we deal with influenza or flu every year. And so it is true. We're going to be dealing with this and potentially, even newer strains in the future.
And so having a strong immune system will help us moving forward to respond to these pathogens?
Absolutely, because a lot of the things that we've discovered, right, that if we are already sort of chronically inflamed, if we have poor cardiovascular health, if we have poor blood sugar regulation, obesity, this puts us at higher risk of, having poor outcomes to something like COVID. So those are types of things those are all diseases or states of health that are driven by mostly lifestyle changes. And so we can we can protect ourselves by really looking into that. The other thing is we know that there's certain nutrients, there's some nutritional changes, certain deficiencies in vitamins that have been associated with poorer outcomes. And so those are types of things too that we can change our diet. We can take certain things that might help us in the future.
A lot of people, I think that in my own life, I've noticed a lot of people sometimes think that they have a stronger immune system that they actually have. A lot of people think they eat better, for example, than they really do, and exercise more than they really do. And what I love about your book is you have quizzes so people can sort of take their own temperature. Can you talk about what the quizzes in your book help to determine?
Sure. So you're absolutely right, is that, many of us have this sort of sense of, oh, I eat really healthy, or I exercise enough, or my sleep's pretty good. But many of us really are falling far from that mark, right? And so the quizzes are really to identify areas that we might be a little bit imbalanced. And so I created this concept of 4 different immunotypes, which are all imbalanced. So that's smoldering, hyperactive, and misguided and weak. And by taking the quizzes, it asks you about symptoms and how you live your life, habits, etc. And it puts you into a category that it gives you a sense of where you might be on this spectrum. And then from there, it gives you information about how you can get things more into balance.
So you mentioned that inflammation is really at the heart of all, regardless of what type you are, all immune system imbalances. So inflammation is kind of a double-edged sword. It actually helps us in a way when we have an acute problem, such as if we get cut by something, that's when the redness and the puffiness. But then chronic inflammation, which is sort of an abstract new term for a lot of our viewers, is what we really need to watch out for. Can you kind of drill down onto that?
Sure. So inflammation is an really integral part of how our immune system works. If we were not able to get inflamed, we would all die, because it's part of the process of bringing immune cells to an area that is being infected. So, for example, if we get a cold, or we get strep throat, for example, everyone's experienced that, where we get a red throat, sore throat, pain, fever. That's all part of the inflammatory response. And that's what brings nutrients to the area, blood flow, white blood cells, and then a lot of killing happens, right? Hopefully the pathogens are killed. But then after that comes the healing process. And that's also part of the inflammatory response. We call it resolution. But if that resolution does not occur efficiently or quickly enough, or if we continue to have insults to our body, which could be not necessarily more infection, but it could be, it could be lack of sleep. It could be really poor food choices. That chronic inflammation and lack of resolution puts us into this state of chronic inflammation. And that then ends up causing disease over time.
Inflammation is, you can't see it, you can't feel it. So it could be raging out of control in your body, and you don't even know it, right?
That's correct. I mean, obviously there's some inflammation that we do feel. Pain, for example, usually from an acute injury, is due to inflammation. Swelling or heat, fever. But many of us deal with sort of nagging issues from day to day, say like arthritis, little pain here and there, a little stiffness in the joints. And we just sort of attribute that to getting older. We don't really think of that as being maybe inflammation. And we're so used to it that we don't question it. But really, we should generally be able to live pretty pain-free and, free of these symptoms. So I think a lot of it is what we've gotten used to.
We're going to take a quick break and be right back to talk about how to reduce our inflammation and strengthen our immune system. My guest is Dr. Heather Moday, author of the book, The Immunotype Breakthrough. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living, and we're continuing our discussion with Dr. Heather Moday, author of the book, The Immunotype Breakthrough. Dr. Moday, you were talking about how inflammation is one of the drivers of a weak immune system. How do we reduce inflammation in our lives, in our bodies?
So, there's lots of different sources of inflammation in our environment. And I would say one of the biggest ones is food. Um, you know, we can make choices on what we eat every day, and a lot of the choices we make aren't necessarily good. So certain things such as chemicals, pesticides that might be in our food, high sugar, like high fructose corn syrup, things like that, or very what we call inflammatory fat. So these would be things like trans fats or industrial seed oils. These our body sees as inflammatory and they don't like them. So our immune system becomes inflamed with that. Also, just lack of certain nutrients, certain vitamins, certain antioxidants. So these would be things like vitamin C and zinc and vitamin A. These tend to put out fires. They are nutrients that act as what we describe as free radical scavengers. So, I mean, they really sort of come to the rescue when we've got a lot of inflammation. They're a really integral part of our immune system health. So, if we can focus on removing some of these more pro-inflammatory foods and bringing in more fresh fruits and vegetables and fiber, that's always really helpful. So that is what I tell people the first thing to focus on. Another area that I think that we sort of ignore a lot is our sleep. And so much has been, discovered about the importance of the quality of our sleep and the length of time that we sleep. And we know that when we go to bed at night, our immune system is actually extremely active. It's a time that we are killing a lot of infections. We're doing a lot of repair to our body, so that when we shortchange our sleep, we actually end up in a more inflamed state. And if you do this every single day, day in and day out, shortchange your sleep, then over time, your body's not going to be able to repair itself. And so that's another key factor to look into.
So people who don't get 8 hours of sleep on a regular basis, I mean, every once in a while, we all have sleepless nights for whatever reason, but there are some people who only get, 6 hours of sleep a night. Are these people at risk of having inflammation? Can you assume that they do have an inflammatory response due to their lack of sleep?
We do know that they have done studies looking at people who are overnight shift workers, right? So they may be awake at night and asleep during the day. And that's really against our natural circadian rhythm. And that we have shown that those, unfortunately, even though it's necessary, we need some of those people to be working right at night. But over time, they can suffer from more chronic disease. And yes, there have been some studies looking even at short-term reactions to sleep deprivation. So I mentioned in the book, there's a study looking at reactions to a vaccine. So people who were given a vaccine and then sleep deprived after the vaccine actually had a much poorer response, less antibodies created against the vaccine than people who got a good night's sleep. And so it is really, really important. And I think if you think about it that way, that this is a time that your immune system is really active and it needs that time, maybe you'd be much more likely to really protect your sleep as much as possible.
There are a lot of people, and I happen to be one of them, who wants to get a good night's sleep. But I have such trouble sometimes, and I'm sure a lot of people watching right now can relate. Falling asleep, and then other times waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to get back to sleep for 2 hours. What kind of tips can you give to people to get a better night's sleep?
And this is a very, very common problem because sleep is something that, you can't just sort of make happen, right? So, a lot of the things that we do during the day are going to affect our sleep later on. So, for example, caffeine intake or any other stimulant intake, chocolate, things that might keep us up, eating too late at night, consuming news or things that might be upsetting too close to bedtime, using, things like computers, phones, tablets. That blue light really affects our hormone melatonin, which helps us with our circadian rhythm. So all of these things go into affecting how we fall asleep and whether or not we can stay asleep, throughout the night. And there are other things too, medications that people take, stress in their life. So I do outline a lot of different things that people can do that they can bring into their routine that can help maximize their sleep quality.
Well, I'm glad you brought up stress because we're going to take a quick break and be right back to talk about stress and the importance of lowering stress because of your immune system health and about the importance of our gut health in our overall immunity. So we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Heather Moday. The book is called The Immunotype Breakthrough. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are continuing our discussion with Dr. Heather Moday, author of the book, The Immunotype Breakthrough. Dr. Moday, you talked about the importance of stress as it relates to our immune system. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So, stress is sort of the silent killer in reality, but it's also really something that happens day in and day out to us. I like to explain that it's more of our response to stressors in our life that start to affect our immune system. So if you really dial down to the stress response that we have to either something, that happens to us, like we almost get hit by a car or something upsets us, we have a increase in certain kinds of hormones, specifically something called cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And cortisol is actually anti-inflammatory when it occurs immediately and infrequently. But when we have excess stress and therefore excess cortisol over time, weeks to months to years, it actually starts to change its effect in the body and becomes more immune suppressive and at the same time more pro-inflammatory. So what we know, and this has been looked at in both animal models and also with human studies, is that chronic stress really starts to weaken our immune response, decrease the health of several immune cells, and over time can increase our incidence of certain diseases like heart disease and hypertension and even depression. And so managing stress is really such a crucial part of our lives and a really important thing to do on a daily basis.
But what I found extremely encouraging in your book is that you really outline a lot of techniques that can lower our stress without having to change our circumstances. So we don't have to get rid of those neighbors in order to reduce our stress. And we can, we don't have to get rid of our daily commute. It's the way we interpret the events of our lives, which to me is so very, very helpful. And another thing that you talked about that is so important as far as strengthening our immune system is getting our gut microbiome in balance. This, again, is sort of a new topic for a lot of our viewers. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We've known about the human microbiome for decades, but over the past few years, we have learned so much more because of the science that's available to us. And what we know is that we have this entire almost universe of bacteria and other organisms that live inside our intestinal tract. And they're there for a reason, multiple reasons, but they communicate directly with our immune cells. And that helps direct many different responses to diseases. And we know that people who have a healthy balance of these beneficial bacteria that we're literally born with, these people have really just better outcomes, much better mood, better brain health, better weight management. So it's really, it's quite interesting. And we can support our microbiome in many different ways through food, through getting tons of fiber, by eating fermented foods that you can buy and you can even make at home, things that were sort of traditional and historical in our society, but we've gotten away from that. And also by avoiding certain medications, you can really start to improve your gut microbiome, which is going to be a direct effect, a positive effect on your immune health.
Fascinating information. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Heather Moday. The book is The Immunotype Breakthrough. We're back speaking with Dr. Heather Moday, author of the book, the Immunotype Breakthrough. Dr. Mode, you talked about the importance of balancing your gut microbiome and staying away from certain medications. Which medications in particular are you talking about?
The most important, I would say, are antibiotics. And I know that there's times that people need to take antibiotics for infection, but there's just way too much overuse of antibiotics and we don't need them. And, unfortunately, we've created these very strong antibiotics that kill many, many different kinds of bacteria, but they also harm our gut bacteria, which are helpful to us. And so, and once we do that over time, our microbiome becomes much less diverse and not as effective. And so that would be number one. Other things that I would really look out for would be overuse of things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications. So these would be things like an ibuprofen, things that we would take for pain. And many people use these chronically without even thinking, and these can be damaging over time. And last but not least, I would say are acid suppressing medications. Many of us suffer from acid reflux, but often these are used for too long and maybe other, interventions aren't always explored. And so I would say, if this is something that you suffer from, speak to your doctor, maybe look for some other alternatives or try to limit the amount of time that you take them. Because all of these can over time change our gut microbiome in a negative way.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Dr. Mode, how can our viewers find out more about you and get your book?
Absolutely. So they can go to my website, which is modecenter.com. And then they can also follow me on Instagram, which my handle is @theimmunitymd, where I do post a lot of other information.
Dr. Heather Mode, thank you so much for being our guest on this edition of Healthy Living. Great to see you. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it too.
And thanks to you, viewers, for tuning in to this edition of Healthy Living. Once again, the book is called The Immunotype Breakthrough, Your Personalized Plan to Balance Your Immune System, Optimize Health, and Build Lifelong Resistance. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next time.